All right, can you hear from this? Okay? I can't get, some of you are shaking your head no and some yes. I'll just get a little closer maybe. All right, thank you. Well, it didn't look like much of a contest. It was Pharaoh against two women that weighed 100 pounds apiece. Pharaoh with the greatest army on earth, the greatest wealth, and the greatest, well, he had everything. It was sort of like if we brought the Super Bowl winner down to play our junior high in football. It was just an overmatched thing. They didn't seem to have a chance. And he said to them, I know you've been delivering the babies, all the babies, in Israel, so when you deliver boys, kill them. It's that simple. That'll hold the population down. But it said they feared God, and the word fear in Hebrew is a lot deeper than being scared, afraid. You know how we used to say that? It means you have a reverence for Him. An awe about it. It would be like if you got up to speak here today and Winston Churchill, the greatest speaker we've known, walked down the aisle and sat on the front seat. You would have that feeling about, woe is me, here I am. So the women feared God, they loved God, and they said, we're not going to do that. Now they could have easily said, look, He's the most powerful man on earth. If he just pointed at us, 100 soldiers could come kill us, and we may die. And anyway, all we're doing is bringing more slaves into the world. That doesn't seem too good. Look at us, the slaves here, being mistreated. Why bring more in? Why don't we just forget this and go back home? But there was one other thing. They had God on their side. And you're always in a majority when God's on your side. And you always have the most power. So they were called up by the king again, and they said, well, we can't get there in time. They have the babies before we ever get there. And they went back. He still wanted them to kill them. But they were true to God. And they entered the eternal drama of God then. I read this, I thought this, you know what we're really doing here? We're in church, we're worshiping. We're hearing scripture read and spoken. But what we're really in is something even bigger than this. We're in the kingdom of God. And this drama has been going on forever almost. And we've become part of it. And when we leave here, leave this world, it will still be going on, and other people will be coming in and taking part in the drama of God. Now, the important thing is that we be humble about this. I mean, everybody wants to be center front stage. Well, you may be called to work over in the back or the far back, or back in the middle behind the others. You may not be the big person, but you're the important person and the faithful person for whatever you do. And it's important. It's not where you stand, it's what you're called to do, and you do it with faith. That's the important thing. And they entered this drama to be faithful. They didn't worry where they stood. They were birthing people. And that was their job. You know, there was a scripture I just didn't preach on because I couldn't understand it. And I couldn't find anybody that could explain it to me. It's that passage in Revelation where he calls everyone up to final judgment. Out of the grave, out of hell, out of everywhere. I said, my word, haven't they been judged already? Why is he bringing them up at the end of the world? The end of all time. And then I finally read a scholar that had the idea. He said, you will not know till the end of time all that your life has meant. The people you have touched, who have touched people. Hitler will never understand the vileness he did. All the fathers that died and children grew up without fathers. It's a terrible thing. Well, you will not understand the good you did either. The people whose lives you touched, who touched another, who touched another. It will be the end of time before you find out really all that your life meant. And that's why the scholar said he put it at the end of time so you'd find out what it really meant. I think he's right. Just think, they will stand before God and they will say, well, what did our life count? We were just midwives. You were just midwives. You were just a Sunday school teacher. That's not right. If you're in God's drama, you're important. You're working with God. And they will look down the corridors of time and they'll see Joshua making a conquest of the land where the people were going to live, and they had part in this. They will see Isaiah, Jeremiah, and hear their teachings and know that they were part of what they did to keep the nation alive. They will see David and the great kingdom he established. And finally, they will see down this long line the Christ who came out of these people and established a kingdom that would be forever. One who went into the grave and came back out and said, I have conquered. He solved the two big problems we have. The first one is our sin or our faults. You call it what you want, but it's the wrong things we do and we know it. He forgave them on the cross, and we worry about death, and he overcame death with the resurrection. The two big things we need, he did. He conquered. And they will see that these two little 100-pound women, were gigantic in this march and drama of history. See? Okay. We can't understand it all, and we cannot understand who's going to be important that we touch and who's not. So we need to be faithful all the time in everything. So let me look at some people that were. The Lord gave me a great teaching. You know, one of the hard things about preaching, I'm not just preaching to you, I'm preaching to me. Because when I tell you the story of me and the things I've done wrong, I have to remember them again, bring them up and bring them to you. But I want you to know, I'm like you, I'm a human being. I had a friend who, this pastor was saying, I have thoughts I shouldn't, and I sometimes do things I shouldn't. And a little lady ran up to him afterward and said, Dr. Patterson, you're not like that. You can't be like us. He said, oh, yes I am. Yes, I am. Well, let me tell you, I was at a small church when I got out of seminary, and I was called to me it was a large church, big staff, over 600 in Sunday school, and I thought, pulling my coat up, well, I'll get to preach to a lot of people. This is really wonderful. Let's see what this church is going to do now, because I'm going to be there. I mean, I've studied for 100 years to get to this place. Surely something good's going to come out of this. And the Lord said, Tom, it's not you. First of all, it's me, if I want to use you. So don't get the big head about your speaking. Your gifts are the ones I've given you. See, you didn't just dream them up. And this whole church is in this ministry, not you. You're important. You're in many ways more important than the minister, because you're going to be here forever and he's going to go to another church. See? This is what I'm saying. I had a deacon that delivered groceries to the poor, and out of it came a child who said, I said when I saw you loving my family that we were of value, that when I grew up, I was going to be a Christian like you and a Baptist like you. And 15 years later, she went to Seminole Heights and said, "Where's Homer Singletary?" And they got him, and she said, "I was that kid on the floor when you brought groceries. And I want you to know," and she said it beaming, "today, like you, I said I would be like you. I'm a Baptist and a Christian. And I want you to know delivering the groceries made the difference." See, we don't know what happened. The way you greet people in the parking lot and at the front door, and the way the Sunday school accepts them, man, that's important. The minister can preach anything he wants to, and if you're not loving towards other people, he'll just about die right there. So the church is so important. A friend of mine said he went to take a picture of Jimmy Carter's church, you know, where he teaches Sunday school up in Georgia, in Plains. And he said, "I got out of my car and this guy kept driving the mower back and forth, cutting the grass. And every time I try to get a picture there, he'd come through it. And finally, somebody else came up. She said, 'Who is that?' He said, 'Well, that's Jimmy Carter.'" The President of the United States, former president, he cuts the grass every week. You know why he cuts it? He wants it to look good when the people get there. That they don't say, "Well, this is the church that nobody cares about or takes any care of." These people must love people. It was Jimmy Carter on a tractor in the heat of day. He saw something. He did. Homer Lindsay Jr., do many of you know him? He was at First Baptist in Jacksonville. Had one of the biggest churches in Florida while we were in Miami together. And he built a 1,000-seat auditorium in Jacksonville and filled it. And he spoke to the ministerial group one time. These were some of the things that where the Lord tapped me on the back and said, "Hey, Tom, listen to this." He said, "You know, people think I preach people down the aisle. I don't do that." He said, "My people are out witnessing. And there are people in the service waiting till I finish preaching so they can come tell that they accepted the Lord and they want to be members. I'm not preaching them down the aisle." He said, "The church is touching them and reaching them, and they're waiting till I get through till they can come down." Now that's a humble man. And the Lord does that to work on you. You all remember the story, it's a movie now, of Gary Powers that flew the spy plane over Russia and he got shot down. I just read an article recently by this man who said he flew the mission, but I packed his parachute. Oh, if he hadn't packed the parachute right, he would have gotten down a lot quicker than he did. And we wouldn't have heard much more about him. So, when I graduated from high school, I did not meet more than 3 people, and we had about, 1,500 in our graduating class. I didn't meet more than 3 people the next 20 years in my life. I didn't. We all scattered. We all went elsewhere. Met one at Disney World, first one I'd ever met. In other words, I only had the chance to be a Christian to them those few years in high school. And then it was over. They were gone. And I wondered how much I had failed. What if Stephen, when they said, "If you don't quit preaching like that, we'll kill you," and he kept preaching, and they killed him, and Paul was standing there watching him die like a Christian, asking for forgiveness, seeing the face of Christ. What if he had not been faithful? Here was the most influential man in our faith, other than Jesus Christ, the Apostle Paul. That was a big part of his conversion. You see, you don't know where. Murdo MacDonald is a Scottish preacher and teacher in Edinburgh, and one of the best known men in Europe, a wonderful preacher. Well, he was in the army, during World War II. And one day in the officers' quarters, this man came up to him and cursed him for everything he was worth. Just everything. And Murdo said, I really had a little trouble being patient because I was the boxing champion of our division. But he said I didn't. I tried to be kind to him. The next day, the man came in and he said, thank you for your kindness. My wife has left me, and I was going to take my Lancaster bomber as high as it would go and point it to the ground and push it full throttle. I was through with life. And your kindness and the way you treated me has changed me, and I'm here. His children, his wife that was, maybe things will be different. Because one man in one case was, see, we never know. That's really the problem. We don't know. There was a man who tried to stop the Southern Baptist Convention one time. You know, when we were early, we were just into missions, preaching and missions. And somebody had the idea, why don't we have a theological school and train the ministers better? Well, this fellow went to the convention, and it was a heated thing. It probably wasn't a close vote. And this man got up and said, we don't need educated ministers. They'll just ruin the convention. Now, I know that's possible. But he said, we don't. And he said, Lord, I pray that you'll make us more ignorant than we are. And someone said his prayer was answered before he sat down. But what if he had won? What if this one man had swayed the crowd so that nobody could have much of an education? And Southern Baptist Theological Seminary came out of it, and with some great professors. But see, this is what I'm telling you. You just don't know. I'll tell you one more in this way. My friend Bill Brook was a captain, a pilot of American Airlines. And you will probably, some of you will remember this. He was flying over the West, and his engine started coming apart on the outside, and it was like it was machine gunning the plane right there and opening it up, and it broke the window and sucked a man out into the night. And down he fell, and they never have found the body. Well, Bill told me, I looked at the plane, I saw the engine coming apart, turned it off. I had power. I said to the craft, I am coming down to the tower, and I'm not going around. I'm going to land the first time. He came down and landed as a big DC-10. There were lots of people on that. That thing held a lot of people. And of course, lawsuits started there. And do you know, they did an investigation, and you know what caused that plane almost to kill all those people and maybe some on the ground? When the mechanics put the cowling back on it after they'd serviced it, they didn't tighten all the screws down. And it opened up, with all that air in, it just ran wild. And that's what happened. It's the little things. I'm going to tell you a big thing now. I told you the last time I was here, several years ago, but you'll remember this. A friend of mine, who was head of the evangelism department in the state of Florida, used to pastor in Dallas. And one day he heard on the radio that President Kennedy had been shot. They didn't know by whom or anything. And he went to the church and he talked to the people and he said, oh, someone's killed the president. How could that be? And the next day or so, you remember it came out, it was Lee Harvey Oswald. And the secretary said, you know, I think he's on our prospect list. She went and looked it up. There it was, Lee Harvey Oswald had been to that church. And the pastor did some more investigation. And he found out that Lee Harvey just lived over a couple of blocks, and he walked through the church property every day he went to school. And the pastor was just beside himself. He cared. And he went up, and some of the members were standing at the front of the church, and he came up and parked and got out, and he said, "Did you know Lee Harvey Oswald was a prospect here and could have come to our church?" And they said, "Yeah, and we're glad someone like that didn't come to our church. We don't want that kind of people." And I thought God must have bowed his head and wept. History could have been changed if a church had won a young man. Now, I want to tell you, this is hard to tell you, but I have missed some things too. When I left Bunnell and went to Miami, and the church was big and I was gone all the time, it's the biggest problem to your marriage. You have two little tiny kids, a year and 3 months, and 1 3 months old, and you're gone all the time doing the work of the Lord in the vineyard of the Lord. You're just out busy. And sometimes we get confused and think that busyness is holiness. That if we just do enough and stay busy and stay tired all the time, we're holy. Well, we can forget things, and we can miss things when we're so busy. And I'll tell you mine. And I still have the name of this boy somewhere. There was a very fine man, used to be a boxer, had the nose to prove it. But the young people loved him. And he worked all over town with young people. And then he would send out things. How about visiting this person? He'd send it to the pastors. Well, one day he sent me one, and I have his name written here, but I won't say it. But I'll never forget it. And he said, "This is a boy that's in some need of some help. See what you can do, Tom." He knew me well. And of course I had 40 other things on the desk and 20 books that my people wanted me to read to be sure I was keeping up with things. And I had all the big meetings downtown to go to, which was really important. And so I put it aside on my desk. And it wasn't more than about 2 weeks from that time. I said, I'll get to it. You know, it has to wait its turn. About 2 weeks, I was over near Opelika Airport, and there's some lakes there, and there were police cars all over the place. And I said, "What's happened?" And they said, "A young man overdosed and drowned in that lake right there." The next day I found out it was this boy that had done it. And the Lord taps you on the back and says, "Tom, you're too busy. You're too busy out in the vineyards of the Lord. You need to look at people more than building a name or being something." That's why I said this is hard to preach, but it happens. But you don't know if you're not teaching the next Billy Graham or the next scientist that will find a cure for cancer. You don't know what it'll do. St. Francis of Assisi said to the class he was teaching about preaching, "Let us go to the village and preach, and we'll use words if we have to." That's right. You're the only sermon a lot of people may see. So here we are today, right in the middle of the drama of God. It's going on, and we're on the stage, and it's going to go on, and we'll be off the stage and someone else. And our task is to be faithful now while we're in the drama of God working. And I trust you will take the meetings you have and the privileges you have to serve is something serious, because you don't know what God is going to do with it, but it's important. Now, we've come to this time where it's time to invite you to do something. Some of you need a church home. You'll have a young preacher before too long probably, and you'll enjoy him, and you'll help him grow and grow the church. and you need to be a member here. If you don't have a church home, this really, Eleanor and I just love this church and enjoy it. They're good people here. They're forgiving people, patient people. Do that. And some of you have thought about faith for years, and you've never made a commitment. You just sort of tiptoed around looking at it. This would be a good day to make a decision. I'm going to follow Christ. I'm going to trust Him for forgiveness, and I'm going to be part of His drama that's going on right now. I'm going to enlist. I'm going to follow Him. We're going to sing, and if God has touched you, I want you to make these decisions for membership or for salvation, for trusting Him. You will never know what you can be until you find out what God can do with you. And don't waste your youth looking around, trusting, start living it. As we sing our hymn of invitation, you come, you are welcome.